Welcome to the Business of Drinks, where we go behind the bottle, interviewing beverage innovators and icons about how they built their businesses.
We take a data-driven approach, analyzing the brands, products, and categories that get customers and consumers excited.
And we cover several drinks categories, from wine, beer, and spirits to non-alcoholic drinks, as well as THC, adaptogen, and functional beverages.
So whether you're working in drinks or just interested in the stories behind your favorite brands, join us each week as we explore how companies are unlocking growth at every stage in the game.
Thanks for joining us, and let's dive in. Hello, BOD crew, and welcome back to the Business of Drinks. I'm Erica Ducey.
And I'm Scott Rosenbaum. Today, we've got an episode packed with legal insights for drinks brand founders, and it features none other than Ryan Malkin, a principal attorney at Malkin Law. Ryan has been on a previous episode, and he is a top lawyer in the alcohol space, in the cannabis and hemp spaces. He works with brands on everything from regulatory approvals, labeling compliance, distribution strategies. So if you are a founder, an executive, or just a curious listener, maybe considering launching a brand one day, this episode is mandatory listening, because getting the legal side of things right can make or break your business.
As Scott mentions, we did an entire episode with Ryan Malkin, episode number 2, and it covers the legal ins and outs of starting a brand. So if you haven't heard that one, go back to episode number 2 and give it a listen, especially if you're considering launching a brand. But this time, Ryan is coming back for a second episode to answer listener questions. So we will be tackling some of the stickiest wickets in the legal space. Probably the biggest question we've been getting from founders lately is folks looking for advice on functional claims. So that could be probiotics for gut health, or caffeinated ingredients like coffee or teas, or electrolytes for hydration. And if you're an alcohol or THC brand, or even a non-alc brand, we wanted to know, how far can you go with making health claims without risking legal action?
Yeah, this has been coming up a lot. You may recall brands like Vizzy, for instance, right? This is a hard seltzer brand that Molson Coors Beverage, they settled a class action lawsuit in 2023 for nearly $10 million to resolve claims that these Vizzy hard seltzers, were misleadingly labeled as having, an antioxidant from, vitamin C from a superfruit. And there are other examples like Flying Embers, a hard kombucha line that was subject to a class action suit in 2021. Poppy, the better for you soda, another health claim lawsuit. So it's coming up over and over and over again, because the space is evolving so quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And, this is an area where alcohol, THC, and non-alc brands alike, they want to be very thoughtful and intentional about their labeling and marketing, and also be crystal clear on their risk tolerance as an organization. Because look, if you are a small company, a $10 million settlement could push you into bankruptcy.
Exactly. And this is the type of thing where Ryan's expertise really lends itself to helping folks navigate this space, this regulatory maze, because sometimes it's as simple as even trying to figure out, or as difficult as trying to figure out, are you dealing with the TTB or the FDA when it comes to labeling do's and don'ts, because they have different rules and they have different regulations when it comes to making or not making health claims. And this doesn't just pertain to your can or your bottle. It could be your website. It could be your marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Ryan also shares the latest legal trends shaping the industry around THC beverages. And in particular, we do a bit of a deep dive on hemp-derived THC drinks and how they are shaking up traditional alcohol marketing, and why many of these brands are actually ditching big distributors to go independent because the distribution for landscape for THC has been so fragmented and it's really evolving quickly. I think a lot of distributors are playing catch up and really trying to understand the legal landscape. So we've been getting a lot of questions on this front. There's a great article in Bloomberg that breaks down the THC legal landscape. If you're looking for a primer, it shows a map of the states where hemp derived THC beverages are legal. And, some of these in some states, they're now in restaurants and bars, as well as liquor stores and grocery chains. So there's 24 states where beverages are now legal, the hemp derived THC containing beverages, and an additional 12 states where sales are legal with some limitations. So we'll put a link to that article in the show notes. But the gist of it is that there is a total land rush happening on the brand side, and distributors are scrambling. Just to bring in one data point, the research firm Brightfield Group estimated that sales of hemp derived THC beverages last year quadrupled, growing to almost $400 million in annual sales. And that's expected to keep growing at a 14% compound annual growth rate through 2029 to hit 750 million. So, yes, land rush, lots of stuff is happening in this space, and it is a massive scramble.
It's incredible how quickly this is all changing. And there's certainly a mismatch in understanding from a regulatory standpoint, from a distribution standpoint, from a supplier standpoint. So hopefully we tie some of those things up. And Ryan really does do a good job at helping express what, in particular, suppliers would want to know for themselves and in dealing with others, such as wholesalers. So, and he does so much more. You in this conversation also cover some direct to consumer updates when it comes to shipping alcohol. And there have been a lot of changes on that front. Ryan shares the inside scoop on which states are opening up and how craft distilleries can really take advantage of some of these DTC rights that they're starting to claim.
Yeah. And we can't forget about the foundations, which is Ryan reinforces how much contracts matter, whether you're talking co-packing agreements, distribution deals, investor protections. Ryan explains why getting airtight legal agreements is one of the best forms of insurance for your business. And believe me, I will take his word for it.
And with that, here's our conversation with Ryan Malkin of Malkin Law.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Discover the future of craft spirits March 10th through 12th in Tucson, Arizona at the American Craft Spirits Convention and Expo. You'll join producers, vendors, and industry leaders to discuss the latest production trends, advocacy initiatives, and the big topic on everyone's mind right now, how to stay competitive in 2025. And on top of all that, you'll have a really good time. Register online at americancraftspirits.org/BOD. Follow the link for your Business of Drinks $25 discount. Ryan, thanks so much for coming on the Business of Drinks.
Thanks for having me again. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, we are so happy to have you here because we've been getting a ton of questions from our listeners that we thought, who is the best person for us to go to? Of course, it is Ryan Malkin. So let's start out. Now, a lot of folks that listen, they ask us about FDA versus TTB oversight of their product formulations and labeling. So I certainly don't have all the answers, but are there instances where both agencies have oversight, or is it always that alcohol is the TTB and non-alc is FDA?
So it's a great question, but on the alcohol beverage side, while TTB regulates the labeling and formulation of alcoholic beverages, the FDA does evaluate the safety of the ingredients that go into the products. So In other words, TTB looks to FDA for what those ingredients are to make sure that they are generally regarded as safe or GRAS. Or there's times we've had where products predate GRAS, in which case you can oftentimes make an argument that you can use those products or ingredients. So to answer your question, it's sort of both, but when you have an alcoholic beverage, typically you would just be dealing with TTB, or you are just dealing with TTB. There's very rare occasions, and then unless we've had instances with a new to world type of product
Hmm.
for TTB, and we get involved with FDA as well. But for most products, 99% of the time, you're going to be doing alcohol TTB, non-alc FDA.
And then what is the situation for THC containing products?
That would again be more of an FDA. It's certainly not a TTB thing,
Yeah.
unless for THC. The only exception is if you're going to put hemp in a alcohol beverage product, which is obviously sort of related but different than THC. But there is a hemp policy where you can put hemp seeds or hemp seed oil or something to that nature in an alcohol beverage product under the TTB's hemp policy.
Okay, interesting. Yes, so many nuances here that I think all producers out there are just trying to get their hands around. So, in your experience, is there one agency, FDA or TTB, that's easier or harder to work with?
Well, let me just start by saying that all of the kind of discussion we're going to have here is not for legal advice, or is not intended to be legal advice, but for information and educational purposes only. And really, in my opinion, I think TTB has more resources in terms of consumer outreach. I see them as certainly accomplished more. They have a lot of webinars. They have a lot of PowerPoints. I find personally that the information they put together is kind of easier to read and digest for especially non-lawyers. I also think it's much easier to reach TTB
Yeah.
than FDA. The the nice thing, I think, when you have an alcohol beverage product and working with TTB, you kind of know whether you're approved. I mean, you not kind of know, you know whether you're approved or not approved, right? You get a formula approval, you get a COLA. So now like, I'm good to go. Even if TTB approved an error, you have some comfort, like they approved it, right? So let me go. Whereas on the FDA side, there is no approval, and therefore you are relying on basically understanding whether or not it's a compliant product, but there's no similar approval process.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I mean, I was just recently talking to someone about the TTB, and they were telling me, like, yeah, the TTB approves something like 500 colas a day, and you generally can get an answer from them within a week or two to find out if your label has been approved. And I thought that was really impressive that, the volume of labels and label approvals that are going through their office is huge.
Yeah, I know the TTV processing time currently is very short relative to what it was several years ago. And you can definitely pick up the phone and call them, ask labeling or formulation questions about, your label. If they send you back an error or something to be changed, like you can have a conversation again, which is just different than the FDA process because there's not a pre-approval.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. All right. So, another question that we have gotten from several producers is about functional ingredients and how to discuss functional claims. So, let's say, for example, that a product wants to call out its use of ginger in the formulation of its alcoholic beverage or THC product, and to say something on the website like, ginger is known to help with digestion and nausea. Um, could they actually do that, or does that type of information run afoul of the law?
I would be a little bit concerned with that because you cannot make substantive claims about the health benefits associated with alcohol. And not only from the regulatory side, but also, of course, there's the Distilled Spirits Council has a code as well. It's not the law, but it could be subject, or industry members could be subject to a violation there, which ultimately ends up being bad PR perhaps, but not a regulatory violation. But anyway, I would not make any positive health claims about a product. Rather, what I would suggest, or what we suggest, is list what the ingredients are, right? Let's say there's ginger, like you said. You can say ginger and, whatever other, ingredients there are, but don't make a claim about it. Like, most people know that ginger does X, Y, or Z, or helps with nausea, or helps with this. And the consumer kind of has to make that jump in their head. So, and there's also two parts, and then two, you have to get into a little bit of a risk analysis, which a lot of brands ultimately do, right? One is label approval, and one is your website and marketing materials. Both are subject to TTB review, but only your label for approval. So some people decide like, hey, we're going to take a little bit more risk with our website or marketing materials and, make the argument if something comes up because it's so, core to our brand. Whereas the label, you have to be a little bit more straightforward because of the pre-approval process.
Mm-hmm.
But long story short, I would be very, very careful and try to just list ingredients versus saying, hey, if you drink this, then you're not going to get nauseous, which, alcohol can tend to do anyway if you drink in excess.
Yeah, definitely. Well, what about caffeine? Because I think, everyone recognizes, okay, caffeine is an energy drink component. Is it the exact same thing there? Like, you don't want to be referring to anything energized. Even I think it's probably a little bit tighter for alcohol, but what about THC products?
Well, okay, so on the alcohol side and the FDA side in general, FDA has said that adding caffeine to alcohol is an unsafe food additive, and that goes back to like the Four Loko products of several years ago. So you cannot add caffeine to an alcohol beverage product based on the FDA guidance, and then also TTB adopts that, of course, which is how you get there. But that doesn't mean that you cannot have a product that has naturally occurring caffeine, like coffee, right? So
Mm.
that's why you have so many espresso martinis. And I look like as of yesterday, 19 labels with espresso were approved by TTB already this year. So the caffeine is naturally occurring, not added, and there's a big difference.
Yeah, that's interesting. So if one of the ingredients is like a coffee or, I can't even think of anything else that really does have caffeine naturally occurring.
Yeah, maybe
But
some
if
sort
it's
of
naturally occurring, you're good to go.
basically, yeah. So you're looking for coffee or maybe some sort of tea. I don't know if it translates into the liqueur or whatever in terms of the chemicals and the caffeine, but
Yeah.
you're looking for something that has naturally occurring caffeine, not added caffeine, which would be different and not allowed.
Okay, interesting. We're also seeing a lot of these alcohol adjacent products that feature adaptogens or nootropics. How loose or conservative should producers be about making health claims related to those ingredients and products?
Well, you still have to be careful. There's been a couple of lawsuits recently regarding claims, and that's happened in the alcohol industry and some of these regard like Flying Embers, which is a hard kombucha, and then Poppy, which is the soda non-alcoholic beverage. They were both had lawsuits recently where basically it's about the claims being um, potentially misleading or arguably misleading, right? So with Poppy, one of their major marketing claims is that they have, probiotics and they're gut healthy and whatnot. But according to the complaint, it's not enough to actually, like, by the time you actually get the benefit of whatever those probiotics or prebiotics are, there's so much sugar that kind of offset that, again,
Mm,
according to the complaint. So it's not as healthy as you would think. And then on the kombucha side for Flying Embers, they were marketing at one point, they had vitamin C's and antioxidants and things like that. Vitamin C could certainly be added potentially as an ingredient, but you wouldn't say, well, it is an antioxidant necessarily. And so the complaint's saying, well, you're misleading us thinking that if I drink more of this, I'll actually get more vitamin C and it's actually good for me. So again, some of this is like from a reasonable consumer, you wouldn't necessarily think you should be out drinking alcohol as like a source of, vitamins.
yeah.
But, you don't want to put yourself out there and then get slapped with a lawsuit and have to defend it, which is obviously extremely costly. So long story short, I would be very careful about health claims, especially on the alcohol beverage side. And if you are making any health claims or any claims at all, make sure that they're actually, truthful and accurate
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
not misleading.
It's really interesting because I think that this, we've been discussing over the past couple of months that really the future is functional, and everyone in the drink space, whether you're alcohol or THC or, an adaptogen drink, everyone wants to be talking about functional benefits. But it really seems like, certainly for the alcohol and THC side, you have to be very careful. And then, but even on the non-alc side, that there's some challenges there as well. Like poppy is a great example of, maybe it's, sugars or other sorts of ingredients that are getting in the way of potential probiotic benefits, or maybe the probiotics aren't strong enough, all of these sorts of things. Any type of claim, it sounds like, can kind of lead you to potential, class action lawsuit or litigation for false advertising. Is that what I'm hearing?
More or less. However, it's not to say that poppy doesn't seem to be doing very well regardless of it. They seem to be everywhere. Like now they have a marketing line that I saw at Target, right? So, one thing is to throw a bunch of money behind defending lawsuits, and another is to, completely go out of business because of the cost of it, because you're completely misleading, right? So you just need to be mindful of what you're doing and understand the risks involved, right? So, I would say that you need to be able to support your claims and try to certainly not be misleading with any claims and be able to defend yourself, right? So if it does go to court, because anybody can get sued for anything, that you're able to support your claims and defend them, and that a reasonable person would buy your products because of whatever the claims that you're making are. So I would say the key takeaway is don't be misleading.
Yeah, yeah. All right, good advice. So I was talking with Scott. We had the conversation about how it does seem like with the TTB or even the FDA, like there's sort of information that's shrouded, like words that are forbidden to use in alcohol labeling or THC labeling. Are there words that you would suggest that people think twice about before using on any of their packaging or marketing outlets?
Well, electrolytes, for the alcohol beverage world would be something that TTB wouldn't approve. You would instead say that you have salt added to it. That
Mm,
from the consumer perspective, maybe it's not quite as clear, but it's sort of the same thing. So there's certain words that TTB has not necessarily approved in the past. And so I think you just need to be careful. Again, like if you have something that's healthy, any of those kind of trigger words where you're trying to suggest that if people drink this, it's actually good for them, is going to be an issue both from a consumer standpoint and from a TTB standpoint. And again, like electrolyte is one word that jumps out to me as being a potential issue with TTB, especially with distilled spirit products.
interesting. So, so even though salt would be an electrolyte, we need to just be as clear as possible that, like, this is the actual ingredient. It's not a class of ingredients. It's not a broader sort of perspective there.
Right, because the idea is that, or the concern from the TTB's perspective, when we've worked with brands who have tried to say like electrolytes are added to this, whatever distilled spirit product, they want to say, well, if you drink this, you're not going to get a hangover, which is not a great claim, obviously. So then the next thing is, well, we don't say that at all, but at least say electrolytes are added, then maybe the consumer will jump like, okay, it's like drinking a little bit of Gatorade and a little bit of, vodka or tequila or something. So you have to, and that's not the case, right? So it's just a little bit of salt added, and we don't want to make any claims about not getting a hangover or anything like that. The consumer is going to have to draw their own conclusions.
Totally. Interesting. All right. So let's hop a little bit into sort of trends that are happening in the drinks industry. So, as one of the premier law firms representing alcohol and THC and other types of brands in the drink space, I'm curious to see what you see evolving. What's the fastest growing segments of companies that you're getting tapped to represent? And what types of things are people asking about?
Well, one has definitely been THC beverages, and I think it's worth because you've mentioned it a few times, kind of running through what that means or what we're talking about when we see THC beverages. Because I think the definition or what people think of it has changed over the past few years. So marijuana, right, is the cannabis sativa L plant with less containing uh, obviously delta 9 THC, right? So the idea is that when people say THC now, they're really talking about hemp derived delta 9 THC. Whereas a few years ago, when you'd say THC, I think everybody was really talking about the marijuana plant, like that you would get either at a medical dispensary or recreational dispensary.
Yeah.
And that's kind of shifted because it was all about CBD from the Farm Bill hemp, and now that's shifted to THC.
Hmm. So, can you talk a little bit about the difference between hemp derived THC products versus marijuana derived THC products and how they're regulated?
So the typical marijuana products are part of the Controlled Substances Act, so federally illegal, which I think everybody knows. And those are products that you would get at dispensaries, both medical or adult use, recreational. The difference is that the hemp derived products, because of the Farm Bill, those products are federally legal at the moment. And what people are doing is taking federally legal hemp, which has no more than zero point 0.3 by dry weight of delta 9 THC, and synthesizing that to create this delta 9 THC product from the hemp. So at the moment, these sort of what you might want to call a rogue intoxicant is currently legal in a lot of states, and we've done a lot of work on where they are and where they're not legal. But that's been a huge trend with a lot of big suppliers looking at getting into the space and smaller people obviously starting up. And so we have a lot of clients asking about like the tasting rules for all these different products and where they can sell them and, distribution contracts for them. And is it the same distributor as beverage, alcohol beverages, etc. And then we also are doing a lot of work with non-alcoholic beverages. So, non-alc RTDs and where they can be sold. And then the alcohol companies are certainly adding more and more non-alc lines. And then what can you do as an alcohol company with your non-alc products and sort of where do those regulations kind of butt up against each other?
Yeah.
Those have been pretty popular. And then I would say a lot of people are actually starting their own distribution companies, right? So the Southern and R&DCs of the world are not a great fit for all brands, especially seemingly the smaller brands. And instead of going with, the typical model of like a Park Street or an MHW, a lot of brands are like, we're just going to do it ourselves, right? We're going to get our own licenses and hand deliver. Like these guys are just a truck anyway. We're going to get a 3PL to do it with us or for us or on our behalf and just do this thing ourselves and hand deliver and make the experience better for everybody.
Hmm.
So a lot of licensing in that way.
Interesting. You mentioned a couple things there that I want to follow up on. Now, one is the rogue intoxicants. So the hemp derived delta 9 THC, though that class of drinks, I'm curious to dig in a little bit there because I just had a friend in New York send me a photo last week of a seltzer shelf in a natural foods grocer, a small independent, and the THC products they were put on the shelf right next to the regular seltzers. And she was saying, how can this possibly be legal? Literally, a kid could like come up and pull this off the shelf. Are you starting to see like legal friction and problems happening in that arena? Is that type of thing coming up very often?
It doesn't come up necessarily in our world because we tend to work more with the upper tier, right? And it tends to be more of a retail issue. However, it is an issue because you want to make sure that your product packaging isn't kind of mimicking. And I'm sure everybody's seen these, gummies even in dispensaries that look like Skittles or look like gummy bears, and there's been litigation or whatever on that. So you want to make sure that your product is still geared toward an adult audience. And there are rules in some states regarding who can buy it, like you have to be 21 and that kind of thing. So, and even on the tasting rules, like we often, even if the rules in a state don't otherwise state, we often tell people like just follow the alcohol guidance because that's going to be best practice in a state that doesn't have anything. So you're not giving stuff to kids and people under 21 and more than a reasonable amount and stuff like that.
Yeah, interesting. Another thing you hit on there was the non-alc brands. So let's say that any brand, let's call it Heineken or some big beer brand, right? Let's say that they have their sort of advertising that they do in the United States, which is, limited both because of the Distilled Spirits Council has sort of rules around what is acceptable and not, as well as there's, sort of a broader regulatory issues there around how you can advertise. Now, let's say that they bring in their non-alc line into the United States, which obviously they do have. How does their ability to advertise that non-alc line change for that category of products?
Well, the question ends up being the rules for alcohol beverage brands obviously change state to state typically under TTB or the alcohol, the state ABC. And you have to look actually at the state rules to see whether it talks about like the industry member or the manufacturer, which would still be kind of the same entity, or the brand itself. And so it's possible that the non-alc brand could give more POS or more, whatever it is, stuff to an account, as long as it's only supporting the non-alc and doesn't try, like in your example, Heineken's going to be a little bit difficult because it's sort of the same brand. They're not sort of exactly the same brand. It's going to be a little bit easier for brands who have a non-alc brand that is completely a different brand name than their alcohol beverage products. Because then you can separate. We're only giving it for this brand over here. We're not giving you anything impermissible on the outside, and we're in fact not giving anything on the non-alc side to support the outside. And so that's where you end up getting this sort of the interactions between the non-alc stuff that you could theoretically give as much as you wanted versus the alc rules. So you have to be pretty careful when you have products that have the same name.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Because I do see these non-alc versions of brands that are familiar alcohol brands starting to pop up more and more, and it really started to get me thinking around like, hey, this non-alc product is certainly building the overall brand of the alc products by having more and more advertising. So it just seems like the sort of reach of those products is even more significant than I've ever realized. Or maybe I'm just paying more attention to it.
It's probably both, but they certainly theoretically could give more on the non-alc side, depending on the state, of course. But they also have to be pretty careful. Like we've looked at the federal rules, and it often talks about industry member versus brand, and so therefore, maybe you're not quite as open on the non-alc side. So you kind of have to look at each case individually, unfortunately.
Okay, interesting. All right, now I'm curious. Also, we sort of have just recently seen Nielsen numbers about the overall wine, beer, and spirits category over the past year, mostly being flat or down from volume and value perspectives. And what are you seeing in terms of producer spirits or other types of alcohol licenses? Are you seeing this business dipping in the legal area as well, or does it still seem to be like the same volumes of inquiries, licenses, volumes that you've seen in prior years? Basically, is the downturn impacting the legal side?
Knock on wood for us, no, we've been as busy as ever. But I would say that we do have a lot of clients who are running out of funds,
Mm.
right? So their capital is drying up, and they have to figure out alternatives, or some of them are going out of business. And I would say that that's been a real issue, and as well because of the prices of whiskey dropping, some people are having issues where they purchased a bunch of bulk whiskey at price X. The price actually now is a little bit lower than what they originally purchased it for. So they could go out and get a new product that's actually better for less. And sales aren't what they thought they would be. So now they're having this issue where they, owe this whiskey house a bunch of money that they don't have, and kind of negotiating contracts. However, that being said, I would say that there's still brands starting every day. So we still have conversations with people like, you know, every single day. I want to start a brand, whatever it is. Maybe it's a THC product, maybe it's a non-alc, maybe it's a alcohol beverage product. Less so probably starting new distilleries, like new craft distilleries, especially in areas that are not highly trafficked. So I've seen a lot of craft distilleries popping up and taking advantage of really the states where they have bar privileges, so on-premise privileges, right? Like in New York or even in Florida. So instead of opening a bar, we're going to open our own little craft distillery like breweries did. So it's kind of, following that model, highly trafficked. Let's make more margin, get a bunch of people in the door and buy the product here directly. And that's a good business model, worrying less so about the outside distribution.
Okay, interesting. And what are the emerging regulatory issues or challenges that you're seeing coming down the pipeline in 2025?
Well, one thing I would give TTB credit for, and even states like in New York, is that they're seeing, I don't know if it's necessarily because of the downturn or just because of the influx of RTDs in the case of TTB, expanding the standard to fill and kind of looking at things anew and be like, do we really need these rules in place? And they've been around for obviously, decades. Is it really important anymore and relevant? And saying, well, if not, then maybe we can get rid of some of these things.
Mm.
And in the case of like New York, it's obviously great to be able to have self distribution for craft distilleries. Now they can do DTC, and so as Council for American Craft Spirits Association, we're really pushing direct to consumer because that's huge. If especially if the sales are not there in other channels, being able to stay afloat with direct to consumer shipping is going to be huge. So I think there's going to be a big push continuing there. Be like, listen, the state yields are going to hopefully go to their lobbyists and be like, listen, we're not going to be able to stay in business unless we get DTC.
Yeah. And so right now for DTC, like in New York, for example, are you able to ship across state lines at this point for craft spirits, or is that still not on the table?
To reciprocal states.
Hmm.
So it's limited, right? It wouldn't be, all 50 states.
Okay. So hopefully that map of reciprocal states will be expanding in 2025 and ahead.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, if we can get DTC for spirits like wine has it, I think it would be a huge opportunity for craft brands and allow them to, stay afloat for those that are struggling.
Great. And I've also seen some talk about formats. So the different sizes of cans and bottles opening up. Is this something that's you've been following?
Yeah, so that's what I was mentioning. The TPB added new standard to fill for wine distilled spirits, so they were eliminating some of the distinctions. And now, like for instance, on RTDs, especially in the spirit space, a lot of clients were limited and a little bit annoyed that they couldn't use what the most available can sizes were.
Mm.
And now the standards to fill are much greater. And obviously you can go to the TTB website, but they have a much more varied number of options for cans and larger formats, which they didn't have before. They can even go up to 3.75 liters. So there's a lot more flexibility for distilled spirits products now, especially
Yeah,
with the rise of RTDs. It's going to, I think, be pretty big.
great. And tell me, do you have any advice for drinks brand founders as they look ahead to building a profitable and legally compliant 2025?
There's a few things that have come up recently that, especially in the world of RTDs, but it's relevant to everybody. And I think it's good for everybody to realize that contracts are your first form of insurance in some ways. And co-packing is obviously huge, and getting those contracts right and having an attorney comfortable and knowledgeable in the space is hugely important. Because, for instance, if you're the co-packer and I go to you and I'm responsible for sending you the cans and I'm responsible for sending you the labels, but you're responsible for putting it all together, if there's an issue or leakage, you're going to point to me and be like, well, the cans or the labels were faulty. And I'm going to say, well, I had nothing to do with any of those things. So why am I responsible? The can company said they're fine. The label company said they're fine. And if it's not in the contract, then everybody's pointing their fingers and you end up in litigation. So it's really, really important to make sure everybody knows exactly who's responsible for what. And when things go wrong, who's taking responsibility. And you also want to make sure in these days, especially, you have D&O coverage that's in place to make sure that people are not selling at multiples that they were a few years ago at the moment. So you want to make sure that if you do have investors, they don't try to come after the company and you as individuals for basically losing all their money potentially.
Mm-hmm.
And
what type of coverage was that?
Like directors and officers liability. So you want
okay.
Definitely have a good insurance broker running through your options with you to make sure that you as individuals are covered, like from the company, and then of course if consumers sue the company. But you want to make sure that your indemnification provisions in their contracts and all that are checking out, and you can try to avoid disputes because it comes up time and time again. The other thing is, I think people have not planned as far enough out, and because capital is drying up and a little bit in the space, and people were thinking they were going to sell earlier, their plans were kind of these 3-year plans when they need to really be thinking a little bit longer term, it seems to me. So we're helping clients kind of in all of those spaces.
So road mapping farther out than just the next few quarters.
Yeah, like people will sign a distribution contract and be like, oh, well, we're going to sell before this term ends, even though they're perpetual, it doesn't really matter in most cases. But they're like, oh, yeah, no worries, we're going to sign it. And I'm like, well, are you sure you're not going to, still be around in a few years and still working with these guys and not be able to get out? And so, thinking through all those things. It's not necessarily a quick flip like it used to be, perhaps.
Tell me what's on tap for the ACSA this year. What are the big initiatives and how do you see the year playing out?
I think the biggest one is going to be direct to consumer shipping, which we talked about before, but that's going to definitely be our top priority. In my opinion, we also have a conference coming up in March in Tucson, which obviously I recommend people attend, but DTC is going to be the biggest topic for all craft distillers, in my opinion. We've already got a lot of wins with CBMA and so forth, so now we got to get DTC.
All right. And lastly, let's say that a drinks entrepreneur asks you for advice. Maybe it's someone to follow on LinkedIn or a newsletter or other resource to stay on top of developments in the legal space. What do you recommend?
So, of course, my law firm, Malkin Law, our website is malkin.law, and you can sign up. We have a newsletter we send out periodically. Also, you can follow us on LinkedIn, and we do a lot more posting there with a lot of news. I think that American Craft Spirits Association and the Adult Non-Alcoholic Beverage Association both have great resources. Of course, PTB and whatever your state is, I would sign up for those newsletters because they send out updates as well. I also, of course, your podcast is the primary source, but beyond that, although I think Startup CPG does a great job. And we also have an app called Set the Bar. It's a separate company, but I run that as well. And it has the alcohol beverage rules in all 50 states and DC for trade practices, which a lot of clients find really helpful as well.
Great. Well, Ryan, it's always such a pleasure to have you on Business of Drinks. Thanks so much for making time to chat with me.
Anytime. Thank you.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Is your drinks brand looking to start or expand import and distribution?
Whether you're seeking to enter new markets or you're unhappy with a current distributor and desiring a better fit, you should know about Swig Partners.
Founded by industry experts Eric Siegelbaum and Amy Troutmiller, Swig takes the guesswork and the legwork out of distribution strategy. Swig helps brands and distributors find the right fit for long-term relationships and sales success.
US-based importers and distributors should reach out too. With Swig, they can explore new products for free. And brands? You can get $100 off by mentioning Business of Drinks. Find out more at swigpartners.com/business of drinks. That's swigpartners.com/business of drinks.
Hi, BOD crew, and welcome back to Last Call. I'm Caroline Lamb, and today we have a really special guest on air. Her name is Pilar Brito. Welcome, Pilar.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So you might know Pilar from social media. She's on Instagram and TikTok as Bar Pilar. She creates these short form wine videos that have gained an immense popularity in really the last few months, but she's been on the platform for about a year. So today we are testing out a new sort of mini series on Last Call, which I am calling 3 Questions with Blank. And I am planning to bring on some of my favorite drinks influencers to give you a look behind the veil of the content that they create and give you some actionable insights about how and why to use influencer marketing. So to start us off, Pilar, will you give us a quick intro of who you are, how you came to be where you are today, and why you created your account?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm a huge fan of the podcast. I have listened to so many episodes. I actually was listening to the one with David, the Silver Oak CEO, this morning. So it's a huge honor to be on. I think you guys do a great job. So hi, everyone. I'm Pilar Brito. I'm on Instagram and TikTok as @barpilar with 2 R's at the end. Couldn't get the handle with 1 R. So that's where you can find me. I'm actually a lawyer by training. I was vaguely interested in wine before that, but in my early 20s, I went to law school. And my law school had a very intense wine society that had been established for a long time. And I just fell madly in love with wine there. I joined the board. I started running tastings for the school every week. I started competing in blind tasting competitions. I did my level 1 sommelier certification. Went on to become a lawyer in LA. I figured, should probably give this a try, given I just spent a lot of money on law school, but my obsession with wine didn't really abate in any way. So kept going with wine certifications and blind tastings. I got my level 3 W set a couple of years ago. And then about a year and a half ago, I started the process for the W set diploma, which, if you're not familiar, is the highest level of the W set certification. And it takes about 2 years to complete. So I'm almost done, which I'm very excited for. But I still felt like I wanted more of an outlet for wine. And I also felt like I wasn't seeing what I wanted to see about wine on social media. So I started my account, Bar Pilar, about a year ago. And I really knew nothing about social media going in. I just knew I wanted to have more of a wine community and I wanted more of an outlet to talk about wine because I was subjecting all of my poor, or very lucky, depending on how you look at it, friends to dinner parties every week where I would lecture at them about wine. So
Totally lucky.
Yeah. So I figured another outlet was due. And over time, it's really developed into a pretty big account. I have about 140,000 followers across platforms. I'm at about 29 on TikTok right now. TikTok is a little bit harder with alcohol content, so I'm actually quite proud of that. And then I'm at 111,000 as of the date of this recording on Instagram. And it's been a ton of fun. I've done my first partnership and I'm really just getting into the groove. And I made the decision a few weeks ago to jump from being a lawyer full-time to being a full-time wine content creator and being in the wine business. I'm still fully figuring out what that looks like since it's a very recent decision, but I'm really excited about it. So really happy to be talking to you now.
That is incredible, and congratulations.
Thank you.
I want everyone to realize the velocity of your growth as well, because I did mention you in the last call not too long ago. And when we had recorded that, you were at about 65,000 followers on Instagram.
Yeah.
And that was just months ago, not even. So that's amazing to hear that you are going to be putting more energy into that. We should dive into our questions. So starting at the top, what types of content from your point of view are getting the most engagement these days on, you can say for each platform or altogether?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do not have a separate TikTok strategy at the moment. I am hoping to shift to doing that, but just balancing law and this, it was too hard to have multiple strategies. So everything I say for now is going to apply to both Instagram and TikTok. So as a very broad theme of what I think is doing best, it's really been series specifically that explain how wine can enhance your life. So when I first started my page about a year ago, again, I knew nothing about social media. So I was just making these one-off videos of like, here's how orange wine is made, or here's a brief primer on wine pairings. And I think those, I got some followers off of it, but I think those didn't really take off for me because one, I wasn't telling people why they should care about wine. I was just sort of assuming they already cared enough about wine to want to know about the technicalities. And that's just a super small subset of the population. And most people are in wine not to know about the technicalities, but to actually enjoy it. And then two, because they were just one-off videos, I wasn't really giving people a reason to keep coming back to my page every week to see what's next. So when I switched to series, whether they're series I do every week or a couple of times a month, that's when my page really took off overall because I solved those two problems with my original content. And it's something I would encourage really any influencer in any topic to consider. So for a while, just to get a little bit more specific, for a while, my series that did the best was my name drop wine series, which I think is how Erica found me from the podcast. And for anyone who hasn't been following me, this is a series I do almost weekly where I talk about the wines that often come up in business settings. So at closing dinners, business development events, etc. And I give these spark notes on them so that you don't feel out of place at these events, or you have a sense of what to order if you need to pick wine for the table or give a gift to a client. You know, I'm a lawyer by training, so I obviously have a lot of experience with these events and being around these types of wines. And I have experience both with initially feeling super out of place and intimidated by wine lists years ago, and then with sort of growing into my wine knowledge, navigating the wine list, and being the person that like does order the wine for the client, does pick the gift that we're giving to the client. So I think people really like this series because I make it very clear that wine can enhance your professional development, and that's why you should bother caring about it at all. So those videos still do really well, but I've been doing them for so long now. Like I think it's been almost 5 months of almost weekly name drop wines. So the performance on those videos is more steady and solid than meteoric like it was at the beginning. But at the beginning, it was like meteoric. It's what really started growing my account. The other series that consistently does really well, and at this point sometimes outpaces my name drop series, it gets very good engagement, is my cult classic series. This is one where every week I talk about a niche wine that sommeliers love, but that the average person might not be as familiar with. Now, normally this would be a series for total wine nerds, but to capture a broader audience, I open my videos, or at least 40 or so percent of my videos, so that I can reintroduce the concept to my audience with this idea that wine is a way that you can hone and express your taste in the same way fashion is, in the same way interior design is. And that when you're developing and expressing your taste, you want to have some elements that really express your uniqueness and your point of view and your experience. So in some of the videos, I'll compare it to fashion. Like maybe you have the designer bag everyone has, but then if you do and you're wearing that, you want the cardigan that you're wearing to be like from your favorite tailor or from a vintage shop in Japan. Something to really show that you have your own taste and point of view. And then I compare it to wine. You know, I say you might want Screaming Eagle in your cellar, and that's great. It's a fantastic wine. And if you can afford it, like props to you, you should absolutely have it. But then complement that with a sort of cult classic, like one of these wines I talk about that shows you've done your research, you know wine, you have unique taste and point of view on wine. So those have been doing the best.
Those series specifically have, or what drew me to you and showed me how someone is successfully bursting the bubble of wine, because I've become very aware that I operate within the bubble because basically my entire career has been in the drinks industry. So it is hard for me to get out of that, and to see someone do it successfully is amazing. So that's great.
That's really flattering. That makes me so happy to hear.
So speaking of getting outside the bubble, can you tell us about what demographics engage the most with your content and why you think that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with age because I think it's the most interesting, and I'm actually really proud of this. Over 83% of my followers as of today are Gen Z and millennials. So 10.1% are 18 to 24, which is actually amazing because I wasn't even into the kinds of wines I'm talking about at that age. Like I was, unfortunately for myself, drinking Andre at college parties. 42.
We've all been there.
Yeah, we all have. We all got to start somewhere. 42.2% are 25 to 34, and 31% are 35 to 44. And in terms of why that is, so I think a lot of people talk about how you need to make wine accessible for Gen Z and millennials to get into it. And my hot take is that that's a little overblown. I think there's certainly some truth to it, but I just think the accessibility point is table stakes because these generations, my generation and my sister is Gen Z, so our generations are super comfortable with ChatGPT, YouTube tutorials. Like if we don't find something accessible, we can just go and teach it to ourselves and make it accessible. So I think the two real reasons that I have that community are first because I explained to them why they should care about wine in the first place. I talk to them about wine in a way that makes it so that they can then take those talking points or knowledge that I'm providing and go use it in the real world to enhance their social status or advance their career goals in an increasingly competitive world. Help them develop and express their taste in a world where it feels like everyone's buying the same stuff and everyone looks the same. Help them bring people together that they care about or want to meet and spend more time with. Speaking from my personal experience and seeing my sister and her friends as Gen Zs, like we are bombarded with information, opinions, things people say we should buy many, many, many times a day, such that our time and mental energy just feels very limited. So I think you have to make it very clear why these generations should spend any time on you or what you're talking about. And I think that's what I've tried to do, especially with the two series, the Name Drop Wines and the Cult Classics. And then I think the second main reason I have the community I do is because I do think I'm speaking to a demographic that has always been there, but wasn't really being addressed, which is that sort of early 20s to early 40s young professional with a good amount of disposable income who wants to be sophisticated and sees wine as a part of developing their adult sophistication. And it is actually willing to spend money and time on that. I think there are a lot of great wine influencers out there, but one of the main reasons I started doing what I'm doing, even though it sort of took me a while to learn how to do it properly, is because most of the accounts I was seeing were either very technical and educational, which I find interesting as a wine nerd, but I know for a fact that isn't interesting to most people. Or they're what I would call hyper accessible. Like, here's what wine to buy at Costco. Here are my favorite $10 rosés for your girl dinner. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. That there's certainly a demographic for that. But I knew that that wouldn't have resonated with me even when I was first getting into wine, because when I was first getting into wine, I was in my early 20s. I was in law school. I was on this sort of elite professional track. I had the promise of good disposable income very soon. And at that point in my life, I wanted to become more sophisticated. I wanted wine to still be this mysterious, elegant, elevated, not hyper accessible thing. I wanted it to represent my new lifestyle. I wanted it to still be elite and aspirational because I wanted it to represent my new lifestyle that I had worked so hard for. I just wanted someone to help me find a way in and help me find a way to understand that. So I think I'm speaking to that consumer because I was and very much still am that consumer. And I don't really think that demographic was being addressed as much before. So beyond age, for gender breakdown, my community is 56% female, 44% male. And some of the reason I do think I have a slightly more female demographic is like I pay attention to my style. I like to think I have good style. So I do get a lot of questions around that. And I get a lot of women asking about it in my comments and DMs, which makes me really happy. I enjoy it. And then I also think even though fine wine, which is something I talk about a lot, probably more than most other wine influencers, has historically been dominated by male consumers, women are increasingly coming into higher incomes and more elite professional roles. So the types of wines and the lifestyle that I'm talking about are increasingly interesting and accessible to women. But my male community is also very highly engaged. So
and it's all part of it, right? You're talking about taste and how it's something that can be practiced in every format of your life. I know a lot of our listeners wonder who is speaking effectively to younger wine drinkers. So we have one example here today. And I totally agree that some of the conversation around that is overblown. And I understand that from my perspective, it feels that way because I am someone who's in their 20s who is very much into wine, but it's enlightening to hear you say that you have this broad base of people in that demographic who are very engaged with your videos and not afraid of the topic or the feel of the exclusivity of it. This is a theme that I'm seeing, that we don't need to shy away from exclusivity with younger people. And the myth that younger people don't have money to spend, I also don't necessarily buy into, because you see a lot of people investing heavily in the clothes that they wear, in the bags that they carry, and it's just getting the spending into a different category. So
Yeah.
I'll
And
leave it at that.
yeah. And I think I think people are just spending smarter. Like, you see trends in fashion of like people my age or a bit younger who have good taste. Like, they're really into vintage clothing because vintage clothing is really high quality. It's higher quality than a lot of the things made today. It expresses your unique taste and point of view. It's not what everyone else has. So like, I want to communicate the same concepts around wine to make it clear that wine is something worth spending on, expresses your taste, and where you can buy smart. That doesn't mean like, looking for discounts on wine. It means just paying attention to where the wine comes from, how it's made, and what it says about you.
Absolutely. So we don't have a ton of time left, but I do want to ask you about your first paid partnership with
Yeah.
Louis Jadot. How did you decide to partner with them? And how did you measure the success of that campaign?
I did just do my first paid partnership with Jadot. I was really, really happy when they reached out. And the reason I decided to partner with them is, I've gotten a lot of other partnership offers, and I'm still discussing a few for Q1 of this year. But it was really, really important to me to make the partnership authentic. And I think authenticity is a somewhat overused word, but to me, that means, would I actually drink this? Is it actually going to make sense to my community that I'm talking about this, such that there will be a real impact of this paid partnership or this campaign that will make them trust me, trust the recommendation, and want to buy it? Because otherwise I'm wasting my community's time and I'm wasting my partner's time. And with Jadot, I was able to talk about Jadot very authentically. Like, they came to my law school when I was in law school. They gave us a tasting. I was introduced to them very early, and they became one of my go-to wines when I was learning about wine, because they're kind of available in a lot of places, which a lot of the wines I talk about aren't available in a lot of places, which has been a bit of an issue for my community. So I was really happy to have something I could authentically talk about that most people would have access to. They're available at a variety of price points. And I was able to really authentically talk about the fact that this was a wine that I drank at a lower price point when I was first learning about wine, but also a wine that, as my tastes have developed a lot more and as I have had more disposable income, I still drink. I still drink very happily, and I'll always pick up if I just see the label on a shelf. And I think it was also a holiday campaign, and they wanted me to touch on the idea that Jadot is a great holiday gift or a great wine to buy if you're hosting for the holidays. And I could also talk about that very authentically, because it is a wine that I gift. It is a wine that I would bring to someone's house if they're hosting a party. It is a wine that I would buy if I'm hosting a party. So that was sort of how I decided to partner with them, is that it was just true. Like, that was really why I decided to partner with them. It was true. And I knew I could be really honest with my community there. So as for measuring success, there weren't affiliate links. So each company can define success differently, of course, but for the metrics I do have, our engagement rate was quite good. I think it was like 2%, which sounds low to someone new to social media, but that's considered a really good engagement rate for a creator on their core content in general. And given that engagement rates on partnerships are usually a little bit lower because people know that they're being advertised to, that's really quite good. I had way fewer followers than I have now at the time. So we got about 60,000 views on it, got a bunch of shares. The view rate past the first 3 seconds, which is a really useful engagement metric. It basically just shows you, are people swiping past your video, or are they stopping and pausing to watch and hear what you have to say? That view rate was higher than my average reel, which was really cool. And that's pretty unusual for partnerships. So we know people were drawn in by it. And for a partnership like this, I think the goal is really to get the brand to an audience that is going to be highly receptive to it. It might mean they buy the product now, or they bought it for the holidays like we intended, or, it might mean they buy it 6 months down the road. But what we want overall is when they're in a shop and they see the Jadot label on the shelf, they think, okay, well, I trust Pilar. I recognize this label, and she said to buy this, so I'm gonna go buy Jadot. And I have this really highly engaged community of people who drink wine, drink alcohol, want to learn about wine. And again, want wine to be a part of this sort of more elevated lifestyle, which Burgundian wines like Jadot really represent, but are also very accessible. So I think it really resonated with my community. And if you go into the comments, you'll see, and again, for the engagement rate, keep in mind, I had way fewer followers than I have now. But if you go into the comments, you'll see people just being very affirming about the fact that I'm partnering with Jadot, being very positive about Jadot overall, sharing their own experiences with Jadot, talking about how great it is that Jadot is accessible in a bunch of places, but has accessible price points. Like, I got a lot of DMs from my community too, just saying, hey, it makes total sense that you partner with Jadot. Thank you for doing something that really made sense for you and is authentic. We can see the alignment here. So that was really cool. And I think made it a really successful campaign.
That had to feel really good. And it definitely caught my eye. It was the first time that you had a paid partnership. Like, I follow, I watch, and all those things came through. So I hope that you know that.
That makes me very happy.
Do you have any final quick tips for brands looking to pitch influencers for paid partnerships?
Yes, I definitely do. So one, be clear on what demographic you're trying to target, and then have a candid conversation with the influencer about whether there's alignment. Like, we all have data, or at least rough data, on age ranges, gender and city breakdowns. And even though this isn't numerically represented, we also have a really good sense of what will resonate with our community and what they prioritize and how they think, because we're interacting with them every day. Like, I make an effort to respond to every single DM that I get, even if it's a little bit late. So I know what my community is looking for. And I have had several calls with brands where when I say, hey, tell me about your target demographic. Like, who are you hoping to target with your wines and with this campaign? And when they tell me, I end up saying, I'm really flattered you reached out and like my content, that I don't want to waste your money. My community, this just isn't going to work for my community. Like, it won't resonate with them. Here are some ideas for influencers that might be a better fit. So I think just be very clear on that, and then have a very open conversation about it, because a good influencer won't want to waste your time, won't want to waste your community's time. Okay. And then the second one is just provide a clear list of expectations up front, and otherwise give the influencer creative control. Jadot did this. I thought it was great. They just gave me a list of like, here are our specifications. Please use this hashtag. Please show the label X number of times. Please show this wine poured into a glass so you can clearly see the color. Please don't do X, Y, Z. But then otherwise, they gave me complete creative control, and there was no intent to make edits afterwards, as long as I sent them the reel and the caption in advance for them to review and approve. And the reason that's great is, one, having clear expectations up front is hugely helpful, just because reshooting or adding in content will just probably make for worse products and is a huge pain for the influencer. It takes a ton of time. And then the reason it's really useful to give the influencer full creative control beyond that is because we just know what's going to resonate with our audience. We know what's going to look natural on our page. We know it's going to make it feel a little bit less like an ad. We know it's going to motivate people to want to go buy your products. So you're paying for that authenticity. So you should get it and enable it.
All right, Pilar, that is all we have time for, but thank you so much for sharing so much good information. I hope our brands who are listening and our aspiring brands that are listening take it to heart, and thank you again for coming on The Business of Drinks.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. It was really nice to meet you.
You as well.